A 27-ton steel needle hung suspended above Manhattan. 860 feet below, the architect William Van Allen stood on the sidewalk watching. His stomach churned. If the cable snapped, 54,000 pounds of metal would tear through 70 stories and crash onto Lexington Avenue. Wait, wrong building. The woman standing in the lobby of 625 Park Avenue in 1941 was 4 feet 10 inches tall. The building manager looked down at her application, then up at her face, then back at the paper showing her net worth of approximately $100 million. She had just married a Georgian prince. She owned beauty salons in a dozen cities across 4 continents. She had built one of the first global cosmetics empires from 12 jars of face cream and absolute refusal to accept no as an answer. The manager delivered his verdict. "We don't lease to Jews." Helena Rubinstein, now Princess Gourielli, stood in the marble lobby of a building designed by James Edwin Ruthven Carpenter, Jr., one of Manhattan's most prominent luxury apartment architects. 13 stories, 32 units. The most prestigious address on the Upper East Side. The triplex penthouse she wanted spanned 26 rooms across 3 floors with a 68-foot salon perfect for the chamber music recitals and art collection she had spent decades accumulating. She bought the entire building. This is the story of a Polish-Jewish girl who fled an arranged marriage in the Krakow ghetto, turned 12 pots of face cream into a fortune that survived the Depression, built 5 palaces on 4 continents while high society tried to destroy her, commissioned Salvador Dalí to paint her as a mermaid chained to rocks by pearls, and spent 50 years locked in a rivalry so bitter her enemy never spoke her name. When she died in 1965, the auction catalog of her belongings ran to 6 volumes. Within months, her greatest rival purchased the Park Avenue penthouse and erased every trace of her design. The woman who refused to be refused left no museum, no preserved mansion, no monument except the innovations every woman uses when she classifies her skin type or wears waterproof mascara. But all of that began 69 years earlier in a cramped apartment above a failing shop in the Jewish quarter of Krakow, where the eldest of 8 daughters refused to marry the man her father chose. Before we discover how that refusal in Poland changed Manhattan's skyline, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about women who turned rejection into empires, subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the estates built by those who refused to disappear. Now, Krakow, 1872. Chaja Rubinstein arrived in the world on December 25, 1872, in the Jewish quarter of Krakow, where Austria-Hungary ruled, and her father's egg business barely kept 8 daughters fed. Naftali Hertz Rubinstein, called Horace by customers who couldn't pronounce his name, preferred books to the selling floor. His shop at Soroka 14/4 in Kazimierz moved merchandise slowly while his wife Augusta Gitta Silberfeld kept the household functioning through sheer determination and a belief that beauty was the only power her daughters would ever possess. The apartment above the shop held 10 people in rooms meant for 5. Chaja slept with 3 sisters in one bed. Their mother's friend, the actress Helena Modjeska, visited occasionally and brought stories of the theater, of audiences who paid to watch beautiful women perform, of wealth that came from being seen rather than being useful. Augusta listened carefully. Her daughters would need advantages she couldn't buy. Beauty would have to serve as dowry, currency, and protection. Every night, Augusta applied Dr. Jacob Lykuski's face cream to her daughters' faces. The cream smelled of almonds and pine bark, thick and white in the small glass jars the Hungarian chemist produced in his laboratory. He claimed it contained herbs from the Carpathian Mountains and extract from fir tree bark. It protected skin from the cold Polish winters and the harsh winds that aged women's faces before their 30th birthday. Augusta's friend Helena Modjeska had introduced her to Dr. Lykuski years earlier, and the cream became the family's nightly ritual. 8 daughters, 8 faces, each one carefully treated because each face represented potential escape from poverty. Chaja, as the eldest, took the responsibility seriously. She watched her mother's careful application, studied how the cream absorbed, observed which of her sisters developed the clearest complexions. She asked Dr. Lykuski questions when he visited the household. What did the herbs do? How did the extract protect skin? Could the formula be adjusted for different conditions? The chemist answered with patience that suggested he recognized curiosity that could become something more. Her father wanted her to study medicine. At 18, she briefly attended medical school. She loved the laboratory work, the precision of measurements, the transformation of ingredients into compounds that changed how bodies functioned. She excelled at chemistry. She understood biological processes intuitively, but the hospital sickened her. The smell of illness, the sounds of suffering patients, the blood and decay overwhelmed her senses. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. Her father pulled her from the program when she grew thin and unhappy, her own health compromised by proximity to sickness. He had another plan. A 35-year-old wealthy widower needed a wife. Naftali arranged the match. His eldest daughter would marry well, secure the family's future, bear children for a man who already had a house and business. The widower was respectable, established, financially stable. Chaja would no longer be her father's responsibility. She would become someone else's burden, and perhaps eventually, if she managed the household well, someone else's asset. She refused. The fights lasted weeks. Naftali couldn't understand why his daughter rejected security. Augusta understood but said nothing. Chaja was 18 years old with no money, no prospects, and no future in Kraków except the marriage her father arranged, or poverty as a spinster helping raise her sister's children. Refusal meant exile from everything familiar. She brought home her own choice, Stanislaw, a non-Jewish medical student from the University of Kraków, handsome and educated and completely unacceptable. Her father refused him immediately. A Jewish girl didn't marry outside the faith. The community wouldn't accept it. The family couldn't survive the scandal. The fights escalated. Stanislaw stopped visiting. Chaja wrote to her mother's brother, Louis Silberfeld, who owned a grocery store in Australia. She asked if she could stay with his family, work in his shop, contribute to expenses, disappear from Kraków and the marriage and the life her father had designed. Uncle Louis sent passage money. She packed 12 pots of her mother's face cream, borrowed clothes from her sisters, and boarded a ship in 1896 with no money and little English. Her father didn't speak to her at the station. Her mother cried and pressed the cream jars into her hands. "Take these. Remember how to use them. Remember what I taught you about faces. Remember that beauty is power when you have nothing else." On the voyage, Chaja became Helena. A new continent deserved a new name. Helena sounded European, sophisticated. Like the actress Helena Modjeska, who had visited their cramped apartment and made Augusta believe that beauty could be currency. Chaja Rubinstein died somewhere over the Indian Ocean. Helena Rubinstein stepped off a ship in Melbourne 3 months later with 12 pots of face cream and a new continent that knew nothing about her father's choice or her refusal. Uncle Louis Silberfeld owned a grocery store in Coleraine, a frontier town in western Victoria where sheep outnumbered people and the sun destroyed women's skin. Helena worked in the store, delivered groceries, learned that Australian women suffered from complexions ravaged by wind and sun in ways Polish women never experienced. The Australian climate was brutal. Women aged decades and years. Their skin cracked and burned and dried until they looked 50 at 30. They looked at Helena's skin and asked questions. "What do you use? Where can I buy it? Can you make more?" She told them about Dr. Lykuski. She described the Hungarian chemist's laboratory in Kraków. She explained the herbs from the Carpathian Mountains, the extract from fir tree bark, the special formula that protected skin from harsh conditions. She didn't mention that the cream was made for Polish winters, not Australian summers. She didn't mention that she had no idea if Dr. Lykuski would ship more. She gave samples to women who asked. They came back wanting more. She fell out with Uncle Louis over money or independence, or simply the fact that she refused to be grateful forever. The details have been lost to history. What survived was the departure. She moved to Melbourne, worked as a bush governess for a farming family whose children needed education and whose wife needed help with endless household labor. The work was exhausting and paid almost nothing. She took a job waitressing at the Winter Garden tea rooms, where Melbourne's emerging middle class gathered for refreshments, and conversation. There she found an admirer willing to fund her business, a man whose name has been lost to history, but whose investment changed everything. He saw potential in the Polish girl with perfect skin who talked about scientific formulations and skin diagnosis. He gave her money to launch Crème Valaze. The amount was modest, but sufficient. She bought supplies. She rented space. She began. The formula was simple. Lanolin from sheep, abundant in Australia, mixed with lavender and pine bark and water lilies to mask the pungent smell of wool fat. She experimented with ratios, testing on her own skin and her few friends until she found a balance that moisturized without grease, protected without residue. She claimed it contained rare herbs from the Carpathian Mountains, the same exotic origin story her mother had believed. The Carpathian connection added mystique. Australian women didn't want local ingredients. They wanted European sophistication. She gave them the story they wanted to hear. It cost 10 pence to make. She sold it for 6 shillings. Within 2 years, she had earned £12,000. But Australian women wanted more than cream. They wanted diagnosis, prescription, the authority of science applied to their faces. Helena gave them that. She opened a salon at 243 Collins Street in Melbourne, then moved to a more fashionable Collins Street location as business expanded. Customers came for consultations. Helena examined their skin in natural light. She asked about their habits, their diets, their exposure to sun. She identified specific conditions, dry patches here, early lines there, sensitivity around the eyes. She prescribed specific treatments. She sold glamour as science, beauty as medicine, vanity as health. The diagnosis model made her wealthy because women believed they needed expert analysis, not just another jar of cream. Nellie Stewart, the celebrated actress, became a patron. When Nellie Melba visited Melbourne, she came to the salon and sang Aida, while tiny Helena, 4 feet 10 inches tall, stood on a chair to examine the diva's complexion. Helena studied the opera star's skin while the most famous voice in Australia filled the small salon. The story spread through Melbourne social circles. Society ladies wanted the same treatment that opera stars received. They wanted Helena to stand on a chair and study their faces with the same intensity she gave to Nellie Melba. They wanted to be diagnosed, prescribed, treated as special cases requiring expert attention. She opened a second salon in Sydney. Her sisters Manka and Stella came from Poland to help manage the expanding business. Dr. Lekuski himself briefly joined the operation, traveling from Kraków to see what Chaja had built in this strange southern continent. Helena admitted that she had improved his formula beyond recognition. She had adapted it for Australian conditions, added ingredients he had never considered, transformed his simple protective cream into a comprehensive line of treatments. He returned to Poland impressed and slightly irrelevant. She created a New Zealand agency. Within 5 years, Australian operations were profitable enough to finance European expansion. In 1908, she left Sister Ceska in charge of the Melbourne salon and sailed for London with £100,000 in the bank and plans to conquer the continent that had rejected her 8 years earlier. Within a year of arriving in London, Chaja Rubinstein had opened Maison de Beauté Valaze at 24 Grafton Street in Mayfair, where 1,000 society ladies paid £200 per year for weekly beauty treatments. The building had once been home to Robert Cecil, Marquess of Salisbury, twice Britain's Prime Minister. Helena filled the space with treatment rooms styled after the Ballet Russe productions that Paris adored. She hired French beauticians who brought Parisian techniques. She imported products from her Australian factory. She made exclusivity the brand. Only certain women could become clients. Only certain skin types qualified for certain treatments. Only Helena could determine who needed what. The artificial scarcity created desperate demand. She met Edward William Titus at a social gathering hosted by modernist writers and artists who found Helena's combination of business acumen and Polish directness fascinating. He was Polish-born, American by citizenship, a journalist and aspiring litterateur who introduced himself with confidence and opinions about modernist art. His real name was Arthur Amyson. He had been born in Kraków in 1870, immigrated to Pittsburgh in 1891, became an American citizen in 1894, and reinvented himself as Edward William Titus somewhere along the way. They shared a language. They shared a city of origin. They shared an understanding that success required transformation. He understood words, publishing, how to make products sound essential rather than optional. Helena's products worked. Edward made people believe they couldn't live without them. He wrote copy that turned face cream into scientific breakthrough. He created advertisements that suggested women who didn't use Helena's treatments were neglecting fundamental self-care. He understood that beauty wasn't about vanity. It was about modern womanhood, scientific progress, self-improvement as moral imperative. They married on July 28, 1908, at the Strand Register Office in London. A private civil ceremony, no family present, just two immigrants who had renamed themselves Building Something Together. She was 36 and wealthy. He was 38 and charming. Within a year, she was pregnant. Roy Valentine Titus arrived on December 12, 1909. Horace Titus followed on April 23, 1912. Helena hired nurses and nannies. She didn't stop working. Women who built businesses didn't get maternity leave. They got help and kept building. The family moved to Paris in 1912. Helena opened her third salon at 255 Rue Saint-Honoré and established a factory in Saint-Cloud, where she worked with chemists to develop more complex formulations. Anti-aging creams, eye treatments, foundations that match skin tones rather than masking them in white powder. She wanted products that enhance natural beauty rather than hiding faces under paint. Edward wrote the publicity materials, produced the advertisements, introduced Helena to artists and writers who frequented the Left Bank cafes. Through him, she met Léon Bakst and Alexandre Benoit, designers for the Ballet Russe. Her salons began reflecting their aesthetic. Bold colors, modernist furniture, art displayed alongside beauty products. The salon became gallery, scientific laboratory, and social space simultaneously. Sister Pauline arrived to manage the Paris operation while Helena traveled between London, Paris, and Australia to oversee the expanding network. Edward opened a bookshop with her money at the sign of the Black Mannequin and began publishing rare books. The marriage functioned as partnership. She built the business. He built the brand narrative. It would not be enough. When war broke out in Europe in 1914, the Rubinstein Titus family fled to the United States. They settled in Greenwich, Connecticut, far enough from Manhattan for peace, close enough for business. Helena opened her first American salon at 8 East 49th Street in Manhattan, then moved to a larger brownstone on West 49th Street as demand overwhelmed capacity. She trained American women to run salons in Boston, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Chicago, Toronto. Her products appeared in department stores with the strict requirement that Helena retained rights to train staff and inspect quality. No department store could dilute her brand. No saleswoman could misrepresent her methods. Control mattered more than distribution. Elizabeth Arden was already there, Florence Nightingale. Graham had come from a Canadian farm family, arrived in New York, worked various jobs, changed her name, and opened her Red Door Salon on Fifth Avenue. While Helena sold science and diagnosis, Arden sold ladylike elegance and pink packaging. While Helena welcomed office girls on Saturday afternoons for affordable treatments, Arden catered exclusively to women who didn't work. They represented different approaches to the same industry, different visions of who beauty belonged to, different aesthetics born from different continents, and different understandings of what women needed. Arden believed beauty should make women marriageable. Helena believed beauty should make women powerful. The difference would define 50 years of competition. They would compete for 50 years and never once speak or meet in person. The 1920s brought American women disposable income, shorter skirts, and permission to wear makeup outside the theater. Helena Rubinstein intended to supply all of it. Her salons multiplied across American cities. She worked with Hollywood stars, teaching Theda Bara and other film actresses how to apply makeup for the camera's harsh lights. The techniques she developed for film would later become standard for all women, as photography became ubiquitous. Everyone would eventually live under the camera's scrutiny. She published the first classification of skin types in 1910. Oily skin required different treatment than dry skin. Combination skin needed specific products for different facial zones. Every beauty company now uses this classification. But Helena invented it. She looked at faces and saw systems. She observed that women with oily foreheads often had dry cheeks. She noted that skin texture varied across the face. She created products for zones rather than faces. The innovation seems obvious now. In 1910, it was revolutionary. She opened the first professional training school for estheticians, establishing hygiene rules and treatment protocols that professionalized beauty work. Before Helena's schools, women learned beauty treatments through apprenticeship or didn't learn them at all. Helena created curriculum, standards, certification. She transformed beauty work from domestic service into skilled profession. She submitted her products to rigorous scientific testing when competitors sold hope in jars with no evidence. She bought the patent for waterproof mascara in 1939 and demonstrated its effectiveness during an aquatic ballet, proving that women could swim, cry, sweat without their eye makeup running. The demonstration became famous. Newspapers covered it. Women demanded the product. Helena had made science entertaining. The business boomed. Edward's infidelities also boomed. By the early 1930s, he maintained a villa on the Riviera where he entertained a young woman whose name Helena knew, but never spoke aloud. Between 1933 and 1937, he spent more time in France than America, more money on rare books than family, more energy on publishing projects than marriage. Helena knew. Everyone knew. Paris expatriate circles gossiped about the literary publisher and his young mistress. Helena said nothing publicly and calculated privately. Helena made a decision in 1928 that revealed her genius for timing. She sold two-thirds of her American business to Lehman Brothers for $7.3 million, equivalent to $127 million today. Lehman Brothers wanted the Helena Rubinstein brand, the distribution network, the salons, the customer loyalty. They paid premium prices for what they believed would be an endless profit stream. They bought high. Helena knew markets couldn't stay high forever. October 1929. The stock market collapsed. Lehman Brothers' mismanagement combined with the crash devastated the company's value. Shares that had sold for $60 dropped to $3. Helena waited. She watched prices fall. She calculated how low they might go. Within months, she bought back controlling interest in her company for under $1 million. She had sold for $7.3 million. She bought back for under $1 million. She profited $6 million from the Depression while other businesses failed, while banks collapsed, while bread lines formed in American cities, while other businesses failed. Helena Rubinstein rebuilt her cosmetics empire and eventually increased its value to $100 million. She established salons in almost a dozen American cities, opened outlets internationally, and became one of the wealthiest self-made women in the world. The Depression taught her that fortunes transferred during crises. They didn't disappear. They moved from the unprepared to the patient. She had been patient. She had been prepared. She profited. She also began collecting art. In the 1910s, sculptor Jacob Epstein introduced her to African sculpture. He brought pieces to her London salon, masks from Gabon, figures from Mali, objects that European museums classified as ethnographic specimens rather than art. Epstein argued they were sculpture of the highest order. Helena agreed. She started acquiring pieces from dealer Georges de Miré around 1931. Bambara dance headdresses from Mali, Fang reliquary heads from Gabon, Kota reliquaries, masks, figures, objects that European museums were only beginning to recognize as art rather than ethnographic curiosities. Charles Ratton, another dealer, helped her build what would become one of the earliest and most significant European collections of African art, numbering over 261 objects. She bought based on aesthetic response, not scholarly knowledge. She looked at a mask and saw power, beauty, craftsmanship. She didn't care about provenance. She cared about whether the object affected her when she looked at it. In 1935, she lent her African art collection to the Museum of Modern Art in New York for their groundbreaking exhibition, Quote 1. The exhibition legitimized African sculpture as fine art, worthy of museum display. Helena Rubinstein, a Jewish immigrant from Poland who sold face cream, helped establish an entire field of collecting and scholarship. When museums now display African art as masterworks rather than curiosities, They build on foundations that collectors like Helena created when they insisted these objects deserved serious attention. By 1935, Helena Rubinstein owned a beauty empire worth tens of millions, a collection of African art that museums envied, and a marriage that existed only on paper and would not survive another 2 years. August 11, 1937. Helena Rubinstein divorced Edward William Titus for adultery and left him without a penny, despite the fact that he had written every advertisement and publicity piece that built her American empire. She charged him with numerous infidelities with a young woman at his villa on the Riviera between 1933 and 1937. The divorce was public. Humiliating for Edward, final. He had written the words that sold her products to millions of women. She left him without enough money to buy a jar of Crème Valaze. The financial devastation was deliberate. Edward had contributed significantly to the business success. His advertising copy was brilliant. His understanding of branding was sophisticated. But Helena had funded everything: the bookshop, the publishing house, the villa where he entertained his mistress, all her money. When the marriage ended, so did the funding. Edward retreated to Cognes-sur-Mer, where he lived in relative seclusion, until his death in 1952. His Black Mannequin press had published 25 books, including D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, but literary fame couldn't sustain him after Helena withdrew her financial support. He had given her access to modernist art and literature. She had given him wealth. When the marriage ended, she kept the wealth and the access, while he kept only the memories and the books nobody bought. She had met someone else 2 years before the divorce finalized. Artchil Gourielli-Tchkonia appeared at a social event in 1935. He was Georgian, an immigrant who had fled the Russian Revolution, born on February 18, 1895. He was 42 years old, handsome, charming, and 23 years younger than Helena. He claimed to be a prince. His grandmother had been Princess Gourielli, but he himself was born into the untitled Tchkonia family of Gouria. He appropriated the title, and Helena didn't care whether it was legitimate. She wanted to be a princess more than she wanted authenticity. The title mattered. The legitimacy didn't. She pursued him. Eager for a regal title to call her own, Rubinstein chased the handsome youth with the same determination she had applied to building salons across continents. She sent gifts. She invited him to parties. She made clear that marriage to her would be financially advantageous beyond any salary he might earn. In 1938, 1 year after divorcing Edward, she married Artchil Gourielli-Tchkonia and became Princess Helena Gourielli. The wedding was small. The name change was immediate. Every business card, every advertisement, every salon sign soon carried her new title, Princess Helena Gourielli. The Polish girl from the Kraków ghetto had acquired nobility through marriage to a man half her age who probably wasn't nobility at all. Some called it a marketing ploy. She called it love. He was affable, decorative, 23 years younger, and absolutely willing to let her run the business while he provided the title and companionship. She created a men's cosmetics line and named it House of Gourielli. She opened a spa at 715 Fifth Avenue with a restaurant, gymnasium, and rugs designed by Joan Miro. The men's line failed quickly. American men in the 1950s were not ready to buy face creams and grooming products, no matter how elegantly packaged. The concept was decades ahead of its market. Helena lost money on the venture, but kept the prince. The marriage succeeded where the business venture failed. For the first time in her 60s, Helena Rubinstein began to relax her routine slightly. She still worked 16-hour days, still approved every advertisement, still traveled between properties to inspect operations. But with Gourielli, she attended parties, visited European health spas, allowed herself occasional breaks from the obsessive work that had defined her life since she fled Poland at 18. He made her laugh. He accompanied her to gallery openings. He provided companionship without competition. He never tried to run her business or challenge her authority. The marriage functioned because he understood his role and performed it well. 17 years. Then he died. November 21st, 1955. Prince Artchil Gourielli-Tchkonia died in New York City. Helena was 82 years old, widowed, and immediately returned to the work routine she had temporarily softened. The funeral was brief. The mourning was private. The work resumed before the memorial service ended. She had built her life around work. Gourielli had been an interruption, pleasant but temporary. The work remained. Widowed at 82, Helena Rubinstein returned to the schedule she had maintained for 6 decades, moving between the 5 palaces she had accumulated across 4 continents while men came and went from her life. The Greenwich estate came first. Purchased in 1915 when Helena fled Paris during World War I and needed somewhere in America that felt like escape. 4 Indian Chase Drive sat in a private waterfront association with deeded access to Mead Point Beach and views of Bruce Park Duck Pond. The Mediterranean villa spread across 1 acre of sweeping lawn surrounded by majestic trees. A grand staircase led to a master suite and 3 ensuite bedrooms with original architectural details preserved from the original. Construction: carved moldings, hardwood floors, leaded glass windows that filtered afternoon light into colored patterns across walls. A carriage house on the property contained 2 additional bedrooms, living and dining rooms, a kitchen, and a 2-bay garage. She designed garden terraces centered on the estate and installed a free-form saltwater pool that curved organically through the grounds rather than imposing geometric rigidity on the landscape. Society magazines photographed her ladies' luncheons there. Elegant women in elegant dresses eating elegant food at elegantly set tables surrounded by manicured lawns and imported statuary. The menus featured broiled calves liver and Melba toast with calorie-free butter, meals calculated to maintain figures while appearing indulgent. Greenwich served as country retreat from Manhattan business, a place where office girls and socialites never mingled because office girls never visited Greenwich. The separation of classes remained absolute even in Helena's most democratic properties. The Paris property came next, an artist's studio duplex in the Montparnasse district of the 14th arrondissement. She described it as being at the heart of the city's literary and artistic center, which it was in the 1920s when Hemingway and Fitzgerald frequented cafes blocks away, when Picasso kept a studio nearby, when modernist movements germinated in the intellectual ferment of the left bank. The studio measured 92 square meters spread across 2 levels bathed in natural light that poured through enormous north-facing windows. Jean Purcell designed the lighting fixtures throughout, including the iconic lamp number 162 that still sits in the bedroom, a chrome and glass sculpture that provided light while making an aesthetic statement about modernity and function. The style fused 1920s ocean liner aesthetic with Art Deco geometry. All clean lines and curved edges and chrome accents. Everything gleamed, everything reflected. The space felt larger than its actual dimensions because mirrors and metallic surfaces expanded the perception of volume. After World War I, Helena established her Paris studio on the Ile Saint-Louis as a salon for artists and writers. She displayed Picasso paintings alongside Miro works, a _2_ chest that had once belonged to Louis XIV, next to modernist furniture. African masks above 18th century French chairs. The juxtaposition was deliberate. She refused to separate historical periods or cultural origins. Everything that interested her belonged together. The studio embodied her collecting philosophy. "I am a businesswoman," she told interviewers who asked about the eclectic mix. "I am used to buying in bulk." Maison Blanche came later, built in the early 1950s in the hills beyond Cannes. Architect Louis Silberfeld designed the villa in Grasse, surrounded by jasmine fields that supplied the French perfume industry with raw materials. The scent of jasmine permeated the property from May through September, overwhelming and beautiful simultaneously. Legendary landscape architect Jean Mousse supervised the grounds, planting Florentine cypresses that would eventually tower over the property and designing gardens that descended in terraces toward the valley below. Each terrace featured different plantings: roses on the upper level, lavender on the second, herbs on the third. The progression created layers of scent and color visible from the main villa's windows. Interior designer Bert Quadvelig handled later renovations, updating bathrooms and kitchens while preserving the original architectural character. The estate comprised 5 separate dwellings. The main villa offered stunning views across the lush valley toward the Mediterranean, visible as a blue line on the horizon. 4 additional structures housed guests, staff, storage, and Helena's overflow art collection. The paintings and sculptures that didn't fit in Paris or New York found homes in Grasse. The design reflected her mature aesthetic. Beautiful, distinguished, and luxurious, without the slightest touch of excess, one architectural critic wrote. The facade showed simplicity and was characterized by purity of line. No Baroque excess, no gilded surfaces, no ornamental overload. Just perfect proportions, quality materials, and light. Maison Blanche represented Helena's restraint, the sophistication that comes from knowing when to stop adding. London maintained her original Maison de Beauté Valaze at 24 Grafton Street in Mayfair, the building that had once housed the Marquess of Salisbury. Whether she maintained a private residence above the Salon or elsewhere in London remains unclear in the historical record, but she definitely kept a London base throughout her life. She visited regularly, inspected the salon operations, met with European suppliers, attended gallery openings and theater performances. London represented legitimacy in ways that Paris and New York never quite could. London was where she had proven that a Polish immigrant could serve British aristocracy and be accepted. If not socially, then at least commercially. New York evolved through successive upgrades. She started with an apartment on West End Avenue when she first arrived in 1915. The apartment was small, functional, nothing remarkable. She upgraded to Central Park West in the 1930s as her wealth grew and her social ambitions expanded. Central Park West suggested arrival, success, entry into a particular class of New Yorker. She moved to 895 Park Avenue before her final relocation, climbing Manhattan's social geography one address at a time. She maintained a private residence above her salon at 715 Fifth Avenue, living literally above the business for a period, sleeping in rooms that smelled of face cream and perfume and the chemical compounds that made both possible. Each apartment was larger, more prestigious, more expensive than the last. She moved steadily east and north until she arrived at the intersection of East 65th Street and Park Avenue, the address that would define the final decades of her life. Each property served a different purpose. Greenwich for escape, Paris for art, Grasse for beauty, London for society, New York for power. She distributed her collections thematically. African art dominated Paris. Modernist paintings filled New York. Baroque furniture appeared in Grasse. She moved between properties seasonally, managing business operations from whichever residence suited the current work. Summer in Grasse, autumn in Paris, winter in New York. Spring split between London and Greenwich. The properties weren't homes. They were operational bases in a global empire that required constant supervision. By 1941, Chaja Rubinstein owned estates in Greenwich, Paris, Grasse, and London, each filled with art and furniture that museums coveted. But none of them had required her to buy an entire building just to live there. That distinction belonged to New York. The building at 625 Park Avenue had been designed in 1929 by James Edwin Ruthven Carpenter, Jr., one of the most prominent luxury apartment architects in New York. He had designed 620 Park Avenue directly across the street, along with numerous other prestigious addresses that defined the architectural character of Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhoods. Working with developer Rosario Candela, Carpenter established the aesthetic standards for pre-war Park Avenue luxury. 625 Park Avenue rose 13 stories and contained 32 units total, each apartment meticulously planned to maximize light, views, and privacy. The building represented the pinnacle of pre-war luxury construction, built when craftsmanship mattered more than speed, when materials came from quality sources rather than cost-efficient suppliers. The triplex penthouse occupied floors 11 through 13 with a hidden mezzanine for servants between the 12th and 13th floors. The mezzanine remained invisible to guests. Service staff lived and worked in spaces that allowed them to maintain the household without intruding on the family's living areas. 26 rooms spread across 3 floors, connected by circular staircases that spiraled through the apartment like architectural sculpture. The main salon measured 68 feet long, large enough for chamber music recitals and parties hosting 100 guests without crowding. A second room, the recreation space, stretched 68 feet by 17 feet, providing space for billiards, cards, or the projection of films that were becoming increasingly popular entertainment for wealthy New Yorkers. 6 bedrooms included one measuring 33 feet 6 inches by 18 feet 2 inches, and another 29 feet 8 inches by 20 feet 6 inches. These weren't bedrooms in any conventional sense. They were suites, private apartments within the apartment. 7 wood-burning fireplaces provided both heat and ambiance, each fireplace different, each mantel carved from different stone or wood. Huge terraces surrounded the living room, dining room, gallery, library, kitchen, and recreation room, offering views across Park Avenue toward Central Park and the Upper East Side, stretching north toward Harlem. Like the majority of East Side's fashionable buildings in 1941, number 625 Park Avenue refused to lease units to African Americans or Jews. The policy was standard, unspoken, absolute. Building management maintained the exclusivity that made Park Avenue valuable by ensuring that only certain people lived at certain addresses. The exclusion wasn't illegal. It wasn't even controversial. It was simply how Manhattan's elite neighborhoods functioned. Jews bought buildings in other neighborhoods. African Americans found apartments in Harlem. Park Avenue remained white, Christian, and wealthy. Helena Rubinstein, newly married as Princess Gourielli, inquired about leasing the triplex penthouse. She was 68 years old, owner of a beauty empire worth $100 million, holder of a title that suggested European nobility and Jewish. Building management reviewed her application. They saw the wealth. They saw the title. They saw the Jewish surname that no amount of money or nobility could erase. Building management delivered their verdict. "We don't lease to Jews." Even her title as princess didn't overcome the anti-Semitism. Even her fortune couldn't buy access. Even her fame as one of the world's most successful businesswomen meant nothing to men who controlled who lived at prestigious addresses. Her money was acceptable. Her presence was not. She bought the building. The building was being converted from rental to cooperative ownership, a transition happening throughout Manhattan as landlords discovered they could sell apartments for more profit than renting them provided. Helena purchased controlling interest. She bought the triplex penthouse. She bought enough additional apartments to ensure that building management could never again tell her where she could or couldn't live. She combined multiple units to create her 26-room residence across 3 floors with servants' quarters hidden between levels. The transaction required lawyers, negotiations, financing arrangements that took weeks to complete. But by the end of 1941, Helena Rubinstein owned the building that had refused to rent to her. The manager who had delivered the rejection no longer had authority over who lived at 625 Park Avenue. Helena did. Helena Rubinstein moved into 625 Park Avenue in 1941 as its owner, not its tenant, and began filling 26 rooms with a collection that would require 6 volumes to catalog when she died. The elevator doors opened on the 11th floor, and visitors stepped into a room that Life magazine would call perhaps the most arrestingly decorated apartment in New York. Red Moroccan marble covered the lobby walls, deep crimson with white veining that caught light from bronze sconces. Amber onyx panels flanked the entrance, glowing golden yellow when backlit. Every surface announced that this was not an ordinary residence. This was a palace suspended above Park Avenue, where a woman who had been told she couldn't rent an apartment had decided to own the building instead. The marble alone cost more than most Manhattan apartments. Helena had imported it from Morocco, shipped across the Atlantic, installed by Italian craftsmen who understood how to work with stone that fractured if handled incorrectly. Salvador Dalí painted 3 murals for Helena in the 1940s and 50s. Dawn, Heroic Noon. And evening transformed one room into a surrealist dreamscape where reality bent according to Dalí's particular madness. The card room became the Dalí Room, a space where guests played bridge surrounded by melting clocks and distorted figures. In one mural, he depicted Helena as a mermaid, chained to rocks by strands of pearls, her face recognizable, her body transformed into myth. The image suggested imprisonment and wealth simultaneously. The pearls that bound her were valuable. The rocks that held her were insurmountable. Dalí understood that Helena's success had trapped her as thoroughly as failure traps others. Venetian shell furniture surrounded the murals, delicate chairs and tables made from actual shells, arranged in Baroque patterns that belonged to the 18th century. The room functioned as conversation piece, art installation, and proof that Helena's taste existed beyond categories like modern or traditional. She mixed centuries the way she mixed cultures. Everything that interested her belonged together. Another room housed her ultra-miniature furniture collection, one of the largest in the world. Glass-enclosed dioramas displayed tiny chairs, tables, beds, entire rooms recreated at impossible scale. She had been collecting miniatures for decades, buying pieces from European dealers who specialized in dollhouse furniture and miniature replicas of royal chambers. Some pieces were centuries old, some were contemporary. The collection served no practical purpose. It existed because Helena bought what interested her, and perfect tiny things interested her enormously. She stood before the dioramas and studied the miniature worlds, complete environments captured in glass boxes where nothing changed, and everything remained perfectly arranged. Custom lucite furniture filled the bedroom and several other rooms, specially designed for her by modernist furniture makers, who understood that she wanted transparency, reflection, materials that looked futuristic in 1957. Donald Deskey, who had designed Radio City Music Hall's interiors, created pieces specifically for the penthouse, chairs that appeared to be carved from ice, tables that seemed to float. Schmieg, Hungate, and Kotzian designed wardrobes and vanities that combined white sycamore with glass tops and curved corners. Everything looked like it belonged in a 1940s vision of the future. All chrome and clear plastic and geometric shapes that rejected historical ornament in favor of pure form. Paintings covered the walls. Pablo Picasso portraits, Pierre-Auguste Renoir landscapes, Joan Miro abstracts, Amedeo Modigliani figures. She had commissioned multiple artists to paint her portrait over the decades, accumulating images of herself the way other collectors accumulated landscapes or still lifes. Salvador Dalí's Princess Artchil, Helena Rubinstein from 1943, showed her carved from seaside cliffs, her face emerging from rock formations, as if geology had produced her rather than biology. Pavel Chilichev's Head of Helena Rubinstein, encrusted with sequins from 1934, covered her face with actual sequins, most of which have tarnished over time, but still create a haunting presence, a face that glitters and decays simultaneously. Graham Sutherland painted Helena Rubinstein in a red brocade Balenciaga gown in 1957, one of his most successful portraits. She collected images of herself, commissioning anyone with talent to capture her likeness for posterity. She was building a visual archive of her own existence, proof that she had lived and looked like this at this moment in time. African sculptures appeared throughout the penthouse, masks from Gabon, reliquary figures from Mali, ceremonial objects from dozens of cultures, all displayed as art rather than curiosities. Hindu-themed screens separated spaces in the bedroom. Carved wood panels showing scenes from religious narratives she probably didn't understand but found visually compelling. Sculptures by Elie Nadelman occupied pedestals and shelves, modernist figures that reduced human forms to essential curves and volumes. The 68-foot salon housed her grand piano, seating for chamber music performances, and enough space for 100 guests at parties that regularly featured visiting artists, composers, writers, and anyone else Helena found interesting. The dining room mixed Baroque excess with modern restraint, gold and white French furniture surrounding a table where guests ate from china that had belonged to European royalty. Helena had bought the china at auction, complete place settings for 24, plates that had served food to aristocrats now serving food to cosmetics executives and avant-garde artists. The kitchen featured the latest appliances and space for staff to prepare meals for large gatherings or just Helena's daily brown bag lunch that she took to the office. She lived imperiously. Staff called her Madame, never Helena. Breakfast meetings happened in her bedroom while she reclined against pillows, and advertising executives presented campaigns without being offered coffee. The executives stood. Helena lay in bed. The power dynamic remained absolutely clear. Dinner parties required formal dress and perfect behavior. Chamber music recitals in the salon attracted New York's cultural elite, people who came for the music and stayed for the opportunity to see inside Helena's extraordinary apartment. She collected guests the way she collected art, accumulating the most interesting people and displaying them in her spectacular setting. Life magazine wasn't wrong. The apartment arrested attention, stopped conversations, made visitors gasp when they entered. Everything announced who had bought the building when they told her Jews couldn't rent. Everything proved that refusal meant nothing to a woman who had built an empire from face cream and determination. While Helena Rubinstein filled her Park Avenue palace with daily murals and African sculpture, her rival Elizabeth Arden was filling her Red Door salon with pink walls and clients who whispered that they would never, under any circumstances, meet. For 50 years, Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden built competing beauty empires within walking distance of each other in Manhattan, poached each other's employees, copied each other's innovations, and never once spoke or met in person. The non-meeting became legendary. New York society expected confrontation, drama, the collision of two massive egos in some public space. Instead, they perfected the art of mutual invisibility. Florence Nightingale Graham had been born on a Canadian farm, arrived in the United States, worked various jobs learning about beauty products, and decided that Florence Nightingale Graham sounded too rural for the Fifth Avenue clientele she wanted to serve. She became Elizabeth Arden, opened her Red Door salon, and began selling ladylike elegance to women who wanted to look naturally beautiful without admitting they wore makeup. They represented opposite approaches. Arden was reserved where Rubinstein was flamboyant. Arden's signature color was pink, soft and feminine and reassuring. Rubinstein's aesthetic incorporated every color simultaneously. Baroque gold next to modernist chrome, next to African masks. Arden marketed to middle-aged women who wanted to maintain their status, selling them the illusion that proper care could reverse time. Rubinstein democratized beauty, welcoming office girls on Saturday afternoons alongside socialites, arguing that every woman deserves scientific skincare regardless of income. Arden collected racehorses and opened Main Chance, a health spa in Mount Vernon where wealthy women paid $250 to $500 per week for vegetable juices and exercise. Rubinstein collected modern art and African sculpture, investments that appreciated rather than consumed money like racehorses did. Socially, they existed in different spheres. Elizabeth Arden could pass as WASP elite, her Canadian farm background buried under layers of cultivated taste and the right associations. She hosted parties that society columns covered. She married into families that mattered. She belonged in ways Helena never could. Helena Rubinstein faced constant anti-Semitism, which she sometimes used to her advantage, playing up her exotic foreignness, her Polish accent. Her connections to European modernist circles that American society found simultaneously threatening and fascinating. Arden wanted to belong to high society. Rubinstein wanted to dominate it. Arden sought acceptance. Rubinstein demanded respect. The difference defined their business strategies and their public personas. The rivalry tactics escalated over decades. Both women poached each other's staff, offering better salaries to lure away trained beauticians who knew their competitors' methods. A beautician who left Arden for Rubinstein brought intelligence about products, techniques, client preferences, pricing strategies. Both sent spies to examine the other's salon designs, product offerings, marketing campaigns. Both refused to acknowledge that the other existed. When journalists asked Helena about Elizabeth Arden, she called her that woman or the other one downtown. Arden similarly refused to speak Rubinstein's name aloud, referring to her only obliquely as _6_. They existed in separate realities that occupied the same city. Helena told one journalist, quote 7, it was the closest she came to acknowledging that Arden had built something worthy of respect. The comment also revealed what she truly believed. Her products were superior. Her scientific approach was more sophisticated. Her innovations were more significant. Arden just knew how to make things pretty. Packaging mattered, but substance mattered more. Helena believed she had both. Arden only had packaging. What neither woman saw coming was the man they both dismissed. Charles Revson started Revlon in a basement in the 1930s. He sold nail polish, not face cream. He advertised on television, not in women's magazines. He targeted younger women who wanted glamour, not older women who wanted preservation. Both Arden and Rubinstein considered his products vulgar, his marketing crass, his entire enterprise beneath notice. Nail polish was cosmetics for working girls who couldn't afford proper salon treatments. Television was entertainment for the masses, not a serious advertising medium. Revson understood both better than the pioneers who had built the industry. While two titans fought for supremacy over beauty salons and face creams, Revson captured the growing television watching, magazine reading, youth-obsessed market that neither pioneer recognized until too late. Revlon's sales tripled in the 1950s. The company sponsored quiz shows, advertised aggressively, made nail polish fashion rather than maintenance. Revlon colors had names: Fire and Ice, Fatal Apple, Cherries in the Snow. The names suggested danger and sexuality, everything that Arden and Rubinstein had spent decades making respectable. Young women wanted danger. They didn't want their mother's beauty rituals. They wanted products that felt modern, rebellious, exciting. By the 1960s, Revlon represented a larger threat to both women's empires than they represented to each other. They never stopped fighting each other long enough to notice. The Death Watch became public knowledge in the 1960s. Helena Rubinstein was in her 90s. Elizabeth Arden was 81. Both women continued working. Both refused to slow down. Both knew the other was aging. The question wasn't if one would outlast the other. The question was which one. When Rubinstein died on April 1st, 1965, Arden received the news at her desk. She told the journalist who called for comment, "Poor Helena." 2 words. The journalist later reported that despite the sadness in Arden's voice, her eyes shone with triumphant joy. She had outlasted her greatest enemy. She had won. 18 months later, on October 18, 1966, Elizabeth Arden died. Their rivalry finally ended, but the irony was only beginning. Widowed at 82, Helena Rubinstein returned to the routine she had maintained for 6 decades. Work, collect, lunch, work. She packed her lunch in a paper bag every morning and carried it to the office like a secretary earning minimum wage. Staff had seen this for 40 years and stopped commenting. She wore cheap nightgowns to bed, bought no luxury in her private moments, saved money on anything that didn't show. Then she commissioned Salvador Dalí to paint murals. Then she bought Picassos. Then she maintained 5 palaces on 4 continents. The paradox defined her. Frugal millionaire, immigrant princess, 4'10" dynamo who built a beauty empire despite looking, as one acquaintance noted, like an icebox. She never stopped working. Even from her sickbed in her final years, she approved advertisements, reviewed financial reports, made decisions about salon locations and product formulations. Staff called her Madame and knew that no excuse justified failure. She founded the Helena Rubinstein Foundation in 1953, dedicating resources to health, medical research, and rehabilitation. In 1957, she established the Helena Rubinstein Traveling Art Scholarship in Australia, supporting young artists in the country where she had made her first fortune. In 1959, she founded the Helena Rubinstein Pavilion for Contemporary Art in Tel Aviv, supporting Israeli artists and establishing a permanent cultural institution. That same year, she represented the United States cosmetics industry at the American National Exhibition in Moscow, traveling behind the Iron Curtain at age 87 to demonstrate American business success. The Cold War needed examples of capitalism producing opportunity. Helena became that example, standing in Moscow telling Russian women about building wealth through skincare. Her company was worth approximately $100 million at the time of her death. Her 5 properties were maintained until the end, staff traveling between Greenwich, Paris, Grasse, London, and New York to keep estates running, whether Helena was present or not. Her collections continued growing. She bought art until the week before she died, acquiring pieces that museums would later beg to purchase from her estate. The collecting compulsion never stopped. She saw something beautiful and bought it. She saw something rare and acquired it. Accumulation was purpose. She made no provisions for preserving her collection as she had displayed it. The thought apparently never occurred to her. Museums preserved collections. Individual collectors didn't. Her sons would inherit. They would maintain the properties. They would keep the art together. She assumed continuity when she should have planned for dispersal. On April 1st, 1965, Helena Rubinstein died in New York City at the age of 92, leaving behind a $100 million company, 5 palaces filled with art, and absolutely no plan for what should happen to any of it. The catalog for the Helena Rubinstein estate auction at Sotheby's Parke-Bernet in New York ran to 6 volumes, 6 separate bound volumes, itemizing furniture, paintings, sculptures, miniatures, African art, European antiques, commissioned portraits, decorative objects, jewelry, and personal effects. Accumulated over 6 decades of obsessive collecting, the cataloging took months. Experts examined each object, researched provenance, estimated values, photographed items for the auction catalog. The result documented not just a collection, but an entire aesthetic philosophy, a way of living with art that mixed periods and cultures according to personal response rather than scholarly convention. The auction in 1966 became the first major United States auction of African, Oceanic, and Americas art. Sotheby's had merged with American auction house Parke-Bernet to handle the estate. The financial success of the auction created a watershed moment for the art market, bridging the old world of European collecting with a new American audience, awakening to non-Western art's aesthetic and investment potential. Collectors who had never considered African sculpture suddenly competed for pieces from Helena's collection. The prices validated what Helena had believed decades earlier. These objects were art. Harry A. Franklin, a Beverly Hills gallerist who specialized in African and Oceanic art, purchased numerous lots. The Bangwa Queen, a royal female statue from Cameroon that Man Ray had famously photographed with Helena in her Paris apartment, went to Franklin's collection. The photograph had made the sculpture famous, Helena standing beside the carved figure, both women powerful, both commanding attention. A Maori teko-teko, stacked human figures that had previously been owned by surrealist André Breton, and before him, British collector William Oldham, also sold to Franklin. A Marquesas Islands War Club, an Easter Island wood sculpture, Sodi. Dozens of pieces that Helena had acquired from dealers Georges de Miré and Charles Raton in the 1930s, all dispersed to new owners who would never arrange them the way Helena had arranged them. In 1990, when Franklin's African art collection was auctioned at Sotheby's New York, the Bangwa Queen sold for $3.4 million, far exceeding the previous world record for African art. The sale vindicated Helena Rubinstein's collecting eye and established that her African art collection had helped legitimize an entire field. The woman who sold face cream had permanently changed how museums and collectors valued non-Western art. Her paintings scattered to private collections and museums. The Modigliani, Picasso, Miro, Renoir works found new homes. The 20 commissioned portraits of Helena sold separately over subsequent years, some fetching over $1 million at auction decades after her death. Pavel Chilichu's sequined portrait entered museum collections. Graham Sutherland's painting of Helena in the red Balenciaga gown became one of his most recognized works. Her miniature furniture collection dispersed to collectors who specialized in miniatures. The glass dioramas broken up and sold individually. Her Baroque French furniture sold to dealers who resold to collectors who placed it in homes that Helena would never see. Everything scattered. The real estate sold separately. The Greenwich estate went to private buyers who maintained the Mediterranean villa and eventually listed it for sale again decades later, advertising it as the former country home of cosmetic icon Helena Rubinstein. The Paris Montparnasse studio passed through various owners and was recently listed for sale by Architecture de Collection, described as a rare opportunity to own authentic Art Deco heritage. Maison Blanche in Grasse similarly changed hands multiple times, recently offered as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to purchase the country estate built for one of the 20th century's most fascinating businesswomen. London properties sold. The various New York apartments found new tenants. Each property became just another luxury real estate listing, the connection to Helena mentioned as historical curiosity rather than defining characteristic. The company continued operating after her death but struggled without Helena's personal involvement in every decision. She had been the company, Her sons tried to maintain operations but lacked her obsessive attention to detail, her willingness to work 16-hour days, her understanding of what made products sell. Within a decade, the business was sold. In 1988, L'Oréal purchased the Chaja Rubinstein brand. Products are no longer available in the United States market where she built the empire. The brand exists internationally, but the founder's presence has been erased from the nation where she achieved her greatest success. The Chaja Rubinstein Foundation continues operating, having distributed over $130 million to organizations focused on health, medical research, rehabilitation, and support for Israel. The foundation survives when the properties and collections have scattered. Philanthropy endures when palaces change hands. The auction dispersed her collection, the sales scattered her properties. But the cruelest fate awaited the Park Avenue penthouse where she had lived for 30 years. Charles Revson purchased the Park Avenue triplex from Chaja Rubinstein's estate in 1965, within months of her death. He was founder of Revlon, the third rival both women had dismissed as vulgar, the man who built a nail polish company while two titans fought over face cream in salons. Revlon had surpassed both Rubinstein and Arden by the 1960s, capturing younger consumers through television advertising and mass-market distribution. Revson was also Jewish, which meant that by 1965, the anti-Semitism that had kept Helena from renting the apartment in 1941 had softened enough that building management sold the penthouse to another Jew without hesitation. Money erases prejudice slowly but eventually. He hired decorating firm McMillen to renovate the triplex. The firm had handled numerous high society projects and knew what wealthy New Yorkers wanted in the 1960s. Clean lines, neutral palettes, tasteful restraint. Everything Helena Rubinstein's apartment was not. McMillen removed the Dalí murals or painted over them. The fate of the actual murals remains unclear. They may have been destroyed. They may survive under layers of paint. Nobody recorded what happened. The Venetian shell furniture was sold or discarded. The custom lucite furniture was cleared out. The African masks came down from the walls. The Baroque dining room was simplified. The gold and white excess was neutralized. The ultra-miniature furniture collection was packed and sold. The Joan Miro paintings were replaced with abstract expressionist works more fashionable in the mid-60s. Revson reduced Helena's Technicolor magnificence into tasteful neutrality, not worth remembering. The 68-foot salon that had hosted chamber music recitals featuring New York's finest performers became a tasteful, entertaining space decorated in earth tones. The Dalí room that had announced Helena's artistic sophistication became a sitting room with beige upholstery. Every surface that had proclaimed Helena's presence was erased and replaced with conventional good taste. Charles Revson behaved in a similar fashion to Helena during his residence, according to building historian James Traeger. Imperious, demanding, running business from the apartment, treating staff with the same mixture of expectation and dismissiveness. He inhabited her space and erased her aesthetic while maintaining her management style. The apartment shaped behavior regardless of who lived there. He died in 1975, only 10 years after acquiring the penthouse that had defined her identity for 3 decades. Princess Ashraf of Iran, twin sister of the deposed Shah, purchased the apartment next. She owned it through the Iranian Revolution and its aftermath. Stores a connection to American luxury, while her country transformed. The apartment became refuge from political upheaval, a place where royalty displaced by revolution could maintain the illusion of power. In the mid-1990s, financier Henry Kravis paid $15 million for the triplex. Princess Ashraf had asked $20 million. Kravis negotiated down, remodeled again, brought his own aesthetic to rooms that had already been stripped of Helena's presence decades earlier. The building at 625 Park Avenue still stands. The triplex penthouse still spans 3 floors connected by circular staircases. The 68-foot salon still offers space for large gatherings. The terraces still provide views across the Upper East Side. But the woman who bought the building because they wouldn't let her rent has been erased from every room she once filled. No Dalí murals, no African masks, no Baroque furniture, no miniature dioramas, no lucite chairs, no trace of the immigrant who turned rejection into ownership. Helena Rubinstein heard quote 9 in a Park Avenue lobby in 1941. She bought the building. The beauty industry said makeup was for actresses and prostitutes. She made it respectable. High society said immigrants didn't belong. She collected art they couldn't afford. Time said nothing lasts. She proved otherwise. Every woman who visits a department store cosmetics counter and has her skin analyzed uses Helena Rubinstein's diagnostic method, invented in 1910 when everyone sold the same products to all women. Every woman who swims or cries while wearing mascara benefits from Helena's 1939 patent for waterproof formula. Every professionally trained esthetician works under standards Helena established when she opened the first beauty schools and transformed beauty work from domestic service into skilled profession. She built no Rubinstein museum. She preserved no mansion as she left it. But the innovations endure. The skin type classifications, the waterproof mascara, the professional training standards, the legitimization of African art as worthy of serious collecting, the insistence that beauty belonged to working women, not just wealthy ones, the proof that a 4'10" immigrant with a Polish accent could build an empire that changed how women understood their own faces. The Park Avenue penthouse shows no trace of her, but her refusal echoes. The refusal of her father's arranged marriage in Kraków in 1896. The refusal to accept that immigrants couldn't succeed. The refusal to believe that Jews couldn't live on Park Avenue. That refusal changed more than addresses. It changed what was possible for women who heard no and decided it meant find another way.